Feeling stuck in that one-person grind? You are not alone. This is the Scale You podcast, your weekly guide to growing your business like crazy. Each and every single week, we're bringing to you entrepreneurs, basically people who've started from scratch or maybe had a little help as well, who are sharing their secrets on how to scale like a boss. We're going to be talking about productivity, we're talking about business, we're talking about automations and AI and everything else in between to help you future-proof your solopreneur journey. On Scale You, our goal is to take you from solopreneur to a thriving business owner. So ditch the grind and let's scale you. Our guest today is Maurizio, and he is the head of investment solutions at Lido Partners Ltd, a regulated finance services advisory company based in Dubai, and has had an amazing career for the last 25 years of international finance with expertise in credit derivatives, structured finance, venture capital, and fund management. He is also the leading voice in the startup ecosystem in Japan. He has been a mentor to several startups in the last couple of years, and education is one of his core principles. I'm super excited for you guys to learn more about him and what he does. So make sure to watch all the way through the end for a lot of Maurizio's golden nuggets. Okay, so guys, welcome my guest, my amazing guest, one of my first European guests so far, Maurizio. Hi, Maurizio. How are you today?
Hi, Leanne. I'm doing great. How about you?
Good, super excited to have you here. And as I was joking before we hit record, I've now turned the tables on you. If you guys want to watch the episode where I was interviewed in Maurizio's podcast, I will have that in the link below. But Maurizio, to start off, I won't start off with a very scary question. I'll just ask of what were highlights in your life that led you to where you are? 3, 5, 10 highlights up to you. But like, what were milestones basically that got you here?
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. It's a complete pleasure being in your podcast. I'm sure you're going to do a much better job at this than I did with your episode. So, the highlights. Well, I think I'm a little bit older, so I think this could take a bit of time. But frankly, focusing on the professional side, the first thing that sort of got me interested in the line of business that took 20 years of my career was a book. It's a book called Liar's Poker. It's a book written by a famous salesperson in sales and trading back in the days of the wild investment banking world. And I said, look, I got to join this sort of environment. It seems very, very cool, very meritocratic. It gives an opportunity for people to take a lot of initiative with their career in a really sort of high-profile setting. And so that book made me think that I had to get myself in shape for that. I'm ready. So got me studying quite hard, giving up a little bit of social life to achieve the sort of grades I needed to get into the programs that would have helped me eventually go into finance, which is the area where I spent 20 years. So reading that book definitely put me in a direction where, at an age where it's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to figure out what they want to do with themselves, with life, with their profession. And I think perhaps as a side note, we don't give enough time to young people to explore different opportunities and different lines of work. But that was back in the day where, by 18, you had to have your life figured out. So it was what it was. And then I spent several years in different investment banks, working as a product structurer and financial engineer, meaning I was putting together financing transactions and investment transactions for institutional investors. At a young age, you start dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars of electronic money. You don't see it. It's not like people walk around with suitcases of cash.
Actual cash, yeah.
Yeah, but it was definitely something that was a little bit unexpected in the sense to experience. As I said, I read it on the book, but it was a little different to actually experience it and feel the pressure of not making mistakes with such large sums of money. But you get caught up in your work. You do that. I started changing jobs. I was poached and going to different locations, worked in London, then in Tokyo. And then I guess the other big thing that happened was the global financial crisis. And that was back in 2008, but actually I experienced the mortgage crisis in 2007, which actually prompted this whole thing with the subprime crisis and all that. And that was an interesting thing. I had a young family at the time. I was working way too hard. And all of a sudden I was thrown into complete chaos. And I myself was actually part of that. I'm sorry to say, because I was working on those credit derivatives and CDOs and structured transactions. So I saw firsthand just a crumbling industry all around me, and that was scary. Made me rethink a little bit, not so much priorities, because I thought I had that pretty clear in my mind, but basically how you position yourself in the world of business and how you can rely on things always being there for you, and the sort of linear paths that we sort of try to think about our own careers and our own selves. There's nothing linear about life. So that was interesting. I expected actually to come out of the finance industry at that point. I didn't. Somehow I stuck with it. Went back to London at that time. I had been in Tokyo, and then moved to Milan again, banking. But did that for a few more years, and then decided to do something completely different. That's sort of my third milestone in a sense. Back in 2017, I left a really fun, very well-paying finance job, and I do have a little bit of regret, to be honest, to go into the world of entrepreneurship and startups. So I set up my own consulting firm to help companies in the space of FinTech, financial technology, bridging the gap, I guess, between the programmers and the bankers. I did that in Japan, so we moved back. We wanted, my wife's Japanese, we wanted the kids to have some exposure to their mother's culture over here. And for me to, finally at my early 40s, do something of my own. And I did that for a while, about I think 3 years, and then I came across a really smart group of people that actually used my services as a company. And they asked me to come on board for their tech startup as a CFO, and I did that for 4 years. I took the company through different financing rounds. But beside the actual work, what was interesting and refreshing was putting myself, not at such a young age anymore, in different contexts, different environment, working with really smart people that knew something completely different from what I knew, and putting it together, right, and try to make something happen out of it. So that was, I guess, my third big milestone or change in my life.
Going to that. That's such a... It's interesting, is in my head as you were walking me through essentially your life, of where you're at. So currently, right now, is it still with that startup, or have you kind of moved on and are doing something else?
No, I've moved on. Back in September, we became empty nesters, finally. Yes. Oh, we deserved a little bit of TLC. So I resigned. We spent a few months traveling with my wife. And then back at the beginning of the year, I figured out, okay, well, what's next? What I'm going to do next? I'm currently working for a financial advisory firm in the UAE. So I'm going back and forth between Dubai and Tokyo, a little bit back into, I guess you call it traditional finance, but in a very entrepreneurial context as a new firm. And I'll see how that goes. Again, try to seek something new every few years. That's sort of, I guess, the message of my career.
Got it. Like I said, when you were walking me through that, and I love that it started with a book, because I'm a big bookworm. Like,
I know
this is 1/4 of my books. I still have so many other books around me.
Fabulous.
It's and I will try to find that book. Yeah, what was the title of the book again? By who?
Liar's Poker.
Liar's Poker by
Michael. Oh gosh, you shouldn't have asked me. I'm bad with names, but you'll find it.
Okay, Michael. I'll look for Michael. Because then that kind of course, you went through what people would say, the normal path. You studied hard, you did well in school, you got work, and then you did venture into entrepreneurship. Like, you started, what's the, I'm trying to find like the saying. You struck out on your own, basically, and then you've worked with startups, which, as someone who my very first actual adult job was with a startup, I can imagine the chaos.
Yes.
And then of course, like, now where you're trying to figure out, you're finally empty nesters. You're kind of kind of traveling for work, but at the same time you can travel for yourself. Such an interesting pathway in industry of finance too. Like finance, as someone who is a more of an actual English major, finance in my head, like before I went into my own business, I was like, oh, it's so boring. I hate math. You know, I actually legitly failed my was it my calculus? I forget one of my math classes in college. I did actually legitly failed it. I had to retake it and finally passed it. But I remember like that feeling of like, what's that? Like, what? Why do I need to
Right.
learn that? Especially as an entrepreneur, like, what does that even look like for me? Like, no, I have to look at my numbers. I have to know what's going on, so I can make the decisions. And I guess for you, what would be challenges, or what would be first question, I guess, is what would be a day to day of someone working in? I want to go back to when you were working CFO, because that's an experience in itself of working with a startup as a CFO, because everything is a mess. I can imagine, because everything is starting up. And what were challenges in your day to day that you had to kind of either had to just conquer or you had to find a way through?
Of course. The work of the CFO or head of finance, or whatever you want to call it, a startup, is really to be a little bit the adult in the room when
Yep.
it comes to managing a business. Right? There's not a lot of experience that a lot of tech entrepreneurs have in actually running a company. They have a lot of experience in writing code, selling. Usually, these are the two areas. That you're the product person or you are a salesperson running the business. But in terms of actually making sure the business doesn't fall over and it keeps going, you need someone that probably has seen it before. Now, I hadn't been an entrepreneur prior to that first experience, all that much, only about 3 years. But throughout my finance career, I was fortunate to be in a position of responsibility very early on, simply by the nature of the job, not because I was particularly good.
Mhm.
It's so I was managing a P&L book, revenue generating desk. So I had to look into the numbers. People
Mhm.
bring that was going to bring in the team, how much we're going to get in our margins, how to divide that margins up if we had to go and work with other counterparts. So there was a concept of supply chain to some extent in that line of business too. So you come as a CFO into startup, and basically you need to start creating processes to create efficiency in the company.
Mhm.
Now, that will be your first challenge because the business guys, and I say guys generally, okay, business, the people within the company focus on the business, whether it's writing code or selling, they're not used to processes for the most part because again,
Mhm.
they are by themselves, a smaller company, or they own the company, so they want to do things their way. So initially, there's always going to be a little bit of friction trying to impose process because it is not as efficient having the process right off the bat. But in the long term, even the medium term, it massively pays off because now you've created synergies and efficiencies. So I would start putting together, even a process for expenses to make sure we had a handle on that. Not because I didn't
Mhm.
trust people going off and buying holidays on the company credit card. Of course not. But it's really just to make sure that we knew how much money we were spending, how we were spending it, whether we were spending it the right way. So there's a lot of really practical work to make sure that the company's up and running. We had this. I implemented the 4I principle for all payments, meaning nobody could go and spend about a certain amount of money without someone else checking. Common sense stuff, probably to you and me, but for a lot of startups, that's very new. But there's also a very strong strategic element to the work of a CFO. I don't know, maybe a bit boring. Okay, I get it. But there is a fun part to it, which is trying to look at the health of the company. The health of the company, for the most part, is exemplified by financial metrics. And how can we convey that message out to prospective investors? Well, first of all, to your current investors, because you got to report to them, but also prospective
Mhm.
investors and to possibly also new hires, right? It's hard for startups to differentiate themselves and hire talent. Everybody says, oh, we're going to hire, you know, A players. Well, guess
Mhm.
what? You're a startup. You'd be lucky if you get a D player, right? In reality, because the A players are not going to be looking for two guys in a laptop startup
Yep.
necessarily. So there's a lot of that work that goes into creating a narrative to support the business from, as I said, an investment perspective, from an ecosystem perspective. And that in itself is a challenge because initially you're not going to have a lot of great stories to talk about. It's all going to be about the product, right, until you get traction. So some of the work with the CFO is also how do I enable the company to get that traction easily? So work on contracts, make sure that you're ready to close deals when you smell the blood in the water, right? When you're
Yep.
there and then the client is ready. You can't say, oh, okay, now we've got to go and figure it out. Um, Many other aspects that are a little bit below the radar perhaps of what companies do, but essentially extremely important to just deliver successful revenue metrics and performance, and I'd say that's a little bit of fun too.
Got it. Well, it's interesting because like I said, for me, someone was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna focus on like making money. I'm gonna focus on." I was that business person that you were talking about. I'm like, I want to just focus on this. Like, I don't know what financial statements are. It is an important factor, even very early, especially early on, actually, in the business, to know your numbers, to have that structure, and like, I can see you very much coming in as kind of the you said it, the adult, but also kind of the guide for them to know. In my head, I imagine you with like a lamppost in the darkness, and you're like, no, no,
Mm,
no, this is where we're going. That's kind of
I
how
like
I'm
that image.
imagining you. Um, and it's essentially getting them to the point of you just basically what you're giving them is just that clarity of like, this is what we're doing, this is where we're headed. It's okay, you can spend, but like make sure that you put it in here so then we know where things are at. So for that, then with the things that you've done for, yeah, when you were working for yourself and you've started in the startup, and you're working currently even in the company that you're working in, what's the value that you're trying to create in the world? Like, as someone who fell into finance, basically, well, got into finance, saw it crumble, but stood strong still, and then eventually starting a company and everything else in your life. What's the value that you always seeking when you're making either connections, like the connection that we've created, or when you're working in basically in what it is that you do? What's the value they're creating? What's that for you?
Well, this has changed over the years, right? And
Mm,
I think it's natural for that to be the case. Um, so early on, I just wanted to prove myself, frankly. So my value was very much introspective, because I wanted to be able to show that I could do what other people around me were doing. I always sort of felt I was the dumbest guy in the room,
mm,
often because probably I was. And uh, when you work in a challenging environment, that's the first thing that comes to you. But I guess over time you find your space. You know where you're good at. You know where you're less good at. And I think
mm,
um, the the next step for me was to really, particularly motivated by changing industry, was really to try to do something that has more concrete impact. And of course, the financial industry, a lot of people hate it, but fundamentally, it's underpinning our economic system. So
mm.
if we have smart people working hard in finance, it makes the whole industrial setup that we live in efficient, and that creates jobs and creates wealth. So we're not just bad guys in finance, but um, right now, what I'm looking for is not so much what I do, but it's who I do with and how I do it.
Mm.
And I think you can only create positive impact around you whether it's first it starts with your colleagues. Right? If you don't have a positive impact with your colleagues, then you can't really do it with anyone else. Um, and then really try to work in an environment that is creative, that supports people, that makes you want to do more. And I know it sounds very generic because it is. It's not like anymore for me, like, oh, I want to be able to hit certain amount of revenues, or I want to get this list of clients working for me, or these big deals closed, or I want to do this and that. I basically just want to find my people, my tribe, and be part of something that I can see has an impact. Because when you work in finance, you see a lot of numbers, you don't necessarily see a big impact, because by the time something may be coming out, you already moved on to something new. So
Yeah.
I like the idea of being in a startup, or being in a setup that is a little bit more a little closer to the real world. Let's put it that way.
Got it. And it is true that the value that we're creating does shift. Like I can imagine when you were just starting out, of course, in the have everything figured out by by 18 years old. You want to make sure that you do have things, even though you are the dumbest person in the room because everyone else has had years and years of experience on top of you, but you still had that like motivation to be smarter, to be better within yourself. And like I like that shifted from oh, I'm the dumbest person in the room and that's okay, to the point where you're not anymore actually the dumbest person in the room, but you're focused on the people that you're working with. You're not anymore focused on what you can do, but what can you do with others. I like that shift basically in perspective. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people who are watching this who are like, oh, I'm in the grind, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z. It's also really good to see the other side of it, I guess. Like for me, I'm still very much in the trenches of it. Of my business is so far 4 years in. I'm trying to start a new business already, and it's the kind of constant of like, oh, will this end? What would this look like at the end? But you giving your kind of a little bit of message from the universe for me today of like, no, it's about what you're who you're doing it with, not just what you're creating, but who you're doing it with. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So what would it look like if you had a second you, second Maurizio, third Maurizio? We had an army of Maurizio? What would be the change that you there would be a lot of back and forth, but what would be the change that you would be wanting to create in the world, or a thing that you would want to create to slowly kind of have the different Maurizio kind of like make small little changes in the world if you could?
Well, that's really hard because I don't think I have it all figured out. So having me drive that change probably is a dangerous thing,
Mm-hmm.
frankly. I think what I'd like to see is, again, that's something I've learned from my business life, is the fact that we live in societies that don't do a great job in aligning interests and incentives among people. And that's how you get things working well, right? When people are have the right incentives for themselves, they are capable of understanding what they can do and be able to given opportunities to exploit that. And so, for
Mm-hmm.
example, uh, I see still incredible amount of inefficiencies in terms of opportunities that are out there. Not just opportunities between the rich world and the poor world, within society too. My wife does an incredible amount of volunteering in charity work, and over the last few years, she's brought to my attention just the evidence. Sometimes you don't even want to look at of the disparities that we see in the world. So I think I would love to multiply myself for the purpose of trying to figure out a way, and again, I don't have it figured out, but try to figure out a way that we can make accessibility to opportunities something that is a little bit fairer and more open. I think it's not just ethically right, it's actually beneficial, right? And beside the ethical part of it, it's the fact that you now bringing into the workforce with the right tools, people that didn't have access to it, and you're just going to create value and productivity. And I'm talking about older people. I'm talking about men, women, any sort of disparity. And as I'm getting older, one thing is I've started to notice some degree of ageism around me. Obviously, I was on the other side of the trade a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it blows my mind. There was actually an article recently here in Japan talking exactly about how now companies are starting to put quotas for hiring older people. And they don't mean the 80 years
Wow.
old, but people who are maybe in mid-career, rather than just focusing on graduates and retraining them. One, that is because there's not a lot of young people in the country, so it's you need to do it. But the other thing is, you have this incredible amount of experience sitting with anyone who's done business for more than 10 years, that
Yeah.
if you give them the right tools and the right opportunities, they can go off and create incredible amount of value around. So, for example, I teach a course at a university here in Japan to senior students about how to launch a startup. And
Wow.
I'm always amazed by the ideas, the experience, the insight that they have, and the passion. It's like, there's this image of people who are in their maybe 40s, 50s, 60s that are sort of done with life. Not at all. Completely the opposite. Uh, but yeah, so that I think a lot of mini me's would try and figure out a way to make accessibility uh, more possible in a lot of contexts.
Got it. It's essentially not giving equality, but giving opportunities for people to be able to rise up. And I love that addition of like you've now are helping shape a lot of people's minds on like how they can think of startups, how they can think of business. I've loved your podcast that also teaches a lot of people on how to do it
Thank you.
as well. So then, Maurizio, if we break you down, if we took apart who you are, like all of the titles on LinkedIn, podcaster, amazing person, so on and so forth. What makes Maurizio you? Like what makes you you? What's kind of your secret sauce, superpower that you bring to yourself every single day?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about sauces, my ragu bolognese is fantastic.
Ooh.
So that's definitely something that makes me unique.
Mhm.
And I love cooking. Um, I mean, that's a tough question, Leanne, because again, what makes me changes as I have new experiences. I come across incredible people like yourselves. I mean, one of the reasons I launched my own podcast is really just because I want to get in touch and understand people like you who have completely different experiences, different perspectives, different driving motivations, and learn from them and be able to add a little bit of that into my profile. uh, I guess so. What makes me is a true passion for learning and being a little bit uncomfortable. Because even though I don't like to think of it that way, that's what I've done with my life and my career. Every few years, I would move the job, location, sometimes both. I try to put
Mhm.
myself in different contexts and not have ego, even though I sort of spent many years in an industry with people with lots of big egos, and frankly, most industries you have people with lots of big egos. But really, to be humble and but decisive, and I know what I know. Like I'm not going to get pushed around, but I'm also very open-minded about what everyone else brings to the table. And I guess the last thing that has also got me a little bit in trouble sometimes is the fact that I always give people uh, an opportunity. I always give people a chance. Um, I don't like playing games, and when you play particularly the corporate world,
Mhm.
that's not great. Sometimes the benefit of the doubt is not your friend. But it's also true for startups, right? Because the moment you start dealing with whether you do B2B, so you're still dealing with companies, you
Mhm.
need to know how they operate. You need to know how the people inside those companies are motivated and try to find your path in it. Or even if you don't, but you're dealing with potential investors, those investors, again, are representatives of companies and
Mhm.
their dynamics are what they are. So you have to be a little bit aware of what's behind all that. But that was not me. And I
Mhm.
think that's something I'm very happy to say. Um, one of my, I'd say, few positive traits.
Got it. Well, it kind of boils down, sounds like it's kind of boils down to keeping true to yourself, and it still goes into that value that you're creating, and where you're trying to create a world where there is opportunity for anyone who wants to rise up, where the right people can, not really the right people, but the people who want to rise up can, without taking away any opportunities from anyone else as well, so then they also have the opportunity to get up. And I love that point of the um, I love the humility and self awareness that you had, the piece that you just said right there, because everyone's evolving. I love your every 3 years you're kind of shifting careers also, and shifting gears, because it's life. It's fluid. It changes. So, Mauricio, how can everyone else get to know you? Is there anything that you would like to talk about as well, or how can people find you as well?
No, absolutely. Thank you, Lian. Just as a side note, something that I would like to stress that is quite important to me is the fact that over my career, one of the biggest accomplishments I've had is when I managed to train people and help them develop. And early on, I started taking the time to do that. And I'm sure I made lots of mistakes, but when I talk to my peers and people in my age group, I can see the ones that have put effort into other people and not just themselves are the ones that have reaped the most rewards. And I think it's a win-win, frankly. It does take skill. You need to put yourself not just into. You don't just need to spend the time. You need to know how to do it and to make sure that you're not overstepping all that. But there's definitely an incredible amount of good value and goodwill that is being brought about by just spending time with the people around you who may have less experience or who are just starting up in their entrepreneurial or business career. People, in terms of finding me, I'm usually in Tokyo and Dubai these days, but digitally, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. If people want to reach out, do send a message because I get too many connection requests from people who just want to sell me stuff. Don't sell me anything. Sell me you if you want to sell me something rather than a product. And my podcast is called Tech Shift F9. So come check it out. It's not as good as Leanne's podcast, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun too, I hope.
Aw, thank you, Maurizio. Well, I'm still starting out and learning from you. And I know I joked about it, like, oh, should have you on my podcast when I started, and I grabbed you and I have you. So thank you so much for your time today, for letting us kind of sneak a peek of the. Like I said, finance is such a topic that people usually don't look at, but you have to when you're starting a business. And the clarity that you've given to people, and also the world that you want to see, the world, your vision, basically, where you see people having the opportunities to be able to rise up because they want to, they have that drive, they want to create things not for themselves but for other people as well. So that's pretty amazing. So thank you so much for your time today, Maurizio.
Thank you, Leanne. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Maurizio. I definitely did. Again, I know when the first time that you guys will hear finance and all of the jargon and all of the words, it might be like, oh my God, it's too overwhelming. But it is an essential key part when you're an entrepreneur and when you're starting your business, is knowing your numbers and knowing your finances. So if you guys liked this interview, if you guys are watching this on YouTube or anywhere else, of course, make sure to hit that like button right there. If you're also watching on YouTube, comment below your golden nuggets coming from Maurizio, as well as any other guests that you guys want us to interview here at the Scale You podcast. And if you still haven't yet, make sure to hit subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this from. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And remember that small steps matters. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.